Jason Miller was left standing at the altar in front of 200 guests when his bride ran out of the church without a word. Humiliated and shattered, he thought his life had just collapsed. But in that same moment, a homeless woman named Sarah stepped forward, the only person who showed him kindness. What happened next would change both of their lives forever. Jason Miller had always imagined his wedding day as the perfect culmination of years of hard work, discipline, and sacrifice. From the moment he founded his construction tech company in Austin, he had believed that success was something you built brick by brick, carefully, steadily, and with absolute control. Love, he assumed, would follow the same rules. He thought he had done everything right, built a stable life, earned enough to provide a beautiful home, chosen a woman he believed shared his values, and planned a ceremony worthy of the life he hoped to create. That's why, when Vanessa Reed turned and ran down the aisle, lifting the hem of her elegant designer gown as she fled Holy Grace Churches like she was escaping a burning building, Jason's world tilted in a way he couldn't immediately process. At first, his mind refused to register what was happening. He stood beneath the sweeping arches of the old Texas church, staring at the doors Vanessa had just disappeared through. He felt the warmth of the spotlight on him, the weight of the boutonniere pinned perfectly to his tuxedo, the pressure of 200 pairs of eyes all locked on the man who had just been abandoned in the most public, humiliating way possible. His grip tightened on the bouquet he was supposed to hand her, the white roses trembling as if they, too, sensed the collapse of everything he had prepared for. His chest felt heavy, not with heartbreak that hadn't hit yet, but with shock so profound it rendered him motionless. Around him, guests began reacting in messy waves. A few gasped. Some whispered into their phones, already typing what would surely become juicy social media posts. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unable to look at him yet unable to look away. He caught glimpses of pity, curiosity, and morbid fascination. This wasn't just a wedding gone wrong. It was a spectacle, an emotional car crash unfolding in slow motion, and he was its center. His mother, Mrs. Miller, sat in the front pew wearing the pale blue dress she'd spent 3 weeks choosing, her hand pressed tightly to her chest as her friends attempted to steady her. She had adored Vanessa, at least, until this moment, and the pain on her face was almost as sharp as his own. Jason exhaled through clenched teeth, trying to keep control, trying to maintain the composure he had been taught since childhood. A Miller didn't break down in front of people. A Miller didn't crumble. A Miller handled things. But how did you handle being left at the altar after 3 years of commitment, planning, and believing? How did you manage the humiliation of realizing your Fink didn't even care enough to warn you she had doubts? Questions ricocheted inside his head, each one more brutal than the last. Was he not enough? Did she never love him? Was he the last to know that everything he'd built with her was one-sided? He searched for answers that weren't there. The priest, Father Donovan, an older man with a kind but wary face, stepped forward as though to offer guidance. Jason saw his lips move, forming gentle, measured words, but none of it reached him. All he could focus on was the growing sting beneath his ribcage. He felt exposed, stripped of dignity, reduced to a man standing alone in a moment that should have celebrated partnership. He'd never felt smaller, not even in the early days of his business when investors rejected him and banks dismissed him as just another young entrepreneur with unrealistic dreams. Jason had been abandoned before emotionally, when his father walked out on the family years ago, but this was different. This wasn't a quiet loss. This was abandonment in its most theatrical, unforgettable form. Vanessa hadn't just walked away from him. She had run, making sure every witness would remember that she chose escape over marriage. He could already imagine the calls his office would receive, the gossip among other business owners, the rumors flying through Austin's social circles. In his line of work, reputation mattered. And right now, his was taking a blow he hadn't anticipated. He looked down at the roses in his hands, suddenly aware of how foolish he felt holding them. Every petal mocked him. He had chosen them because Vanessa once said white roses made her feel calm. He'd adjusted the entire flower arrangement to suit her preference. He'd adjusted everything to suit her preference. And she had still left. A lump formed at the back of his throat, thick and unwelcome. His pride kept him from showing the emotion he felt building, but something inside him cracked. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe it was the betrayal. Maybe it was simply the realization that all the effort he put into building a life with Vanessa had been a miscalculation from the start. He wondered if she had ever loved him the way he had convinced himself she did, or if he had been blinded by his desire to create the perfect story. Suddenly, he became painfully aware that he was standing in a room filled with people who didn't know how to react. Some were looking away out of respect, others were staring, because they had never seen something like this happen. The church felt both enormous and suffocating, like every inch of it was closing in on him. He thought about walking off the altar, but his legs refused to move. The sound of a door shutting at the back of the church snapped him back to reality. Guests who were leaving stepped outside, eager to escape the tension. A few bridesmaids were wiping mascara from their cheeks, embarrassed not for Vanessa, but for the drama they had unknowingly become part of. Jason could practically feel the narrative forming in their minds. Vanessa panicked. Vanessa had doubts. Poor Jason. Poor Jason. He hated the phrase already. His mother rose to approach him, her steps shaky, her expression a mixture of concern and disbelief. Jason lifted a hand, gesturing for her to stay where she was. He didn't trust himself to hear her voice without breaking. He needed space, something he rarely allowed himself, even in moments of stress. He stared again at the easel, still half expecting Vanessa to come running back, apologizing, explaining, saying she needed a moment. But the doors remained closed, no footsteps approached, no forgiveness was offered. Jason understood then, painfully, that she wasn't coming back. Whatever fear had driven her away was stronger than whatever love she claimed to have. For the first time in a long time, Jason Miller didn't know what to do next. He didn't know how to walk off that altar with dignity. He didn't know how to salvage the remains of a day that had derailed spectacularly. All he knew was that his life had taken a sharp, unexpected turn, a turn that would soon lead him to someone he never could have predicted. Someone who would change everything. Jason was still standing at the altar, unable to gather himself enough to move or speak, when he noticed a figure near the front pew shifting hesitantly. At first, he assumed it was another guest trying to sneak out, but then he caught a glimpse of her, the woman with faded jeans, an oversized brown coat, and a small canvas bag held tightly against her chest as though it contained her entire life. She had been seated far from the rest of the guests, almost blending into the wooden pews of Holy Grace Church, and for that reason most people hadn't even realized she was there. Jason certainly hadn't, not until she rose and began walking toward him with careful, almost apologetic steps. Her hair was a little messy, the kind of messy that suggested she had weathered too many nights outdoors, and her boots were worn enough to betray months of being on foot. Still, there was something gentle in the way she moved, something that made even the guests, who were now whispering among themselves, pause long enough to watch. She didn't rush. She didn't hover. She simply approached the altar as if drawn by instinct rather than obligation. Jason frowned slightly, unsure whether she was an usher, a volunteer, or someone who had simply wandered in during the chaos. He had no space left in his mind to categorize her. He wasn't in any state to process another unexpected event, and yet she kept coming closer, her expression soft and compassionate in a way that unsettled him more than the stares of 200 witnesses. When she reached the lowest step of the altar platform, she didn't climb it. She stayed where she was, intentionally leaving a small, respectful distance between them. Jason noticed then that she wasn't a guest. He would have remembered her face, her clothes, her presence. Everything about her stood out too much to blend into a room like this. She looked out of place next to the polished marble columns and extravagant floral decor, like someone who had stepped through the wrong door, but decided not to retreat. "Mr. Miller," she said finally, her voice low and steady, not pitying, not dramatic, just human. Jason inhaled sharply, partly surprised she addressed him, partly grateful someone was speaking to him without judgment. She lifted her eyes to meet his, and the sincerity there hit him harder than Vanessa's absence. "I saw what happened." He didn't know what to say, or if he should respond at all. The last thing he wanted was attention from yet another stranger, especially one who clearly wasn't part of this polished, curated life he had built. But there was something grounding about her tone, something that wrapped around him like a steady hand on the shoulder. "You shouldn't have to stand here alone," she continued. "Not after something like that." Her words landed softly, but they carried more weight than anything he'd heard since Vanessa bolted. Jason tightened his grip on the bouquet one more time before lowering it, wishing he had somewhere to put it, or better yet, somewhere to disappear. With everyone watching, he felt trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake from. Yet here was this stranger, standing before him as if offering him an anchor, an exit, or at least a moment to breathe. He studied her for a moment, noticing the way she avoided staring at the crowd behind her. She seemed more concerned about him than the spectacle unfolding around them. Her eyes, warm brown, steady, and noticeably tired, held the kind of understanding that couldn't be faked. It was the look of someone who had suffered enough to recognize pain instantly in someone else. "What are you doing up here?" Jason managed to ask, forcing his voice to remain level. He wasn't angry, just confused. She swallowed subtly before answering. "I was sitting at the back. I came in to get out of the rain. I didn't want to interrupt anything. But then everything changed." Jason's brows drew together. So she wasn't even a guest. She wasn't part of this disaster at all. She had simply been trying to stay dry and stumbled directly into the most humiliating moment of his life. Yet here she was, approaching him when most people with far closer ties to him were frozen in discomfort or whispering among themselves. "I'm sorry you had to witness that," he said, the bitterness creeping into his words even though he tried to filter it out. "You don't have to apologize to me," she said gently. "None of this is your fault." Her simple reassurance pierced through the fog inside his chest, clearer and more comforting than he expected. He didn't know why her words mattered, but for some reason they did. Maybe because she wasn't part of his professional life, or his social circle, or the world Vanessa came from, the world where appearances mattered more than truth. She was just real, unedited, honest. "People are looking at you like you re the problem," she added quietly, her gaze flicking behind her to the crowd before returning to him. "But you re not. You re just someone who was hurt." Jason exhaled unevenly, caught off guard by how precisely she named what he felt. Hurt, not weak, not pathetic, just hurt. "And you don't deserve to stand up here and be stared at like an exhibit," she said softly. He almost laughed at the irony. This total stranger understood him more in 30 seconds than Vanessa had in 3 years. "Who are you?" he asked. "Sarah," she replied. "My name is Sarah Brooks." The name meant nothing to him, yet the person behind it felt strangely significant. She looked like someone life had pushed to its harshest edges, yet she still held kindness like it was a choice she made every day. And at this moment, that kindness was the only thing keeping Jason from falling apart in front of everyone who already had enough to gossip about. "You don't owe me anything," Jason murmured. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," she said. "I know what it looks like when someone is hurting and pretending not to. I've seen that before." Her voice carried quiet conviction, and Jason believed her. She wasn't saying it to comfort him, she was saying it because she recognized the truth. "If you want," she offered, "I can stay here with you until you figure out what you want to do next." Jason didn't trust himself to speak. He didn't know why her offer mattered so much. But in this moment, she was the only person not looking at him with judgment, confusion, or disappointment. She simply stood there with a presence that felt steady, humankind. He finally nodded, a faint gesture but enough for her to understand. Sarah stepped a little closer, not to invade his space, but to make it clear that he wasn't stranded on that altar anymore. And for the first time since Vanessa ran, Jason felt the smallest sense of grounding, fragile but real, brought not by the people who knew him, but by the stranger who chose to stand with him when no one else dared. Jason stood on the altar steps like a man suspended between two realities, the one he had spent years building, and the one that had just shattered in front of him. Even with Sarah standing nearby, offering a grounding presence that felt strangely comforting. The weight of what had happened pressed on him from every angle. Guests were still restless, shifting, whispering, sending glances full of speculation. The floral arrangements he had invested months into had become nothing more than decorations for his humiliation, and the carefully chosen music now felt mockingly cheerful in the background. The life he had envisioned with Vanessa was gone in one dramatic sprint down the aisle. He felt stripped of dignity and purpose, stuck in a moment where everyone was waiting to see how spectacularly he would collapse. Sarah's presence kept him from falling apart completely, but it didn't remove the H building in his chest. He felt something unfamiliar clawing its way upward inside him, a mixture of anger, confusion, vulnerability, and something more primal, the instinct to reclaim control, to take back whatever part of his life he still could. He had always been a man of decisions, a man who built solutions rather than waited for them to appear. Yet here he was, standing in a room filled with expectations and judgment, and he didn't even know how to walk off the altar without feeling like he was fleeing too. He let out a slow breath, trying to force some sense into his thoughts, but all he kept circling back to was the sight of Vanessa running. That image gnawed at him. He felt like a fool replaying it in his mind. The future he had trusted, the partnership he had invested in, the stability he believed they shared, it had all vanished in less than 30 seconds. And with it went the version of himself he thought he was supposed to be. He had never cared about the opulence of the event or the gossip that would inevitably follow. But the betrayal, raw and public, was a wound he couldn't ignore. He turned toward Sarah again. She was watching him with a look that wasn't pity or discomfort. It was understanding, like she recognized the heaviness he was fighting to keep contained. She wasn't part of this world. She wasn't someone who would use his pain as a headline or a talking point. She was simply present, unassuming, and steady. Something about that steadiness pulled him in like a lifeline. "You don't owe me anything for being here," Sarah said softly. "I just didn't want you to stand alone." "I know," Jason replied, his voice rougher than he intended. "But you came anyway." She nodded once. "Anyone with a heart would." He shook his head slightly. "Not anyone." His gaze flicked toward the pews full of people who had done absolutely nothing but watch. She didn't respond, but she didn't need to. Her presence was enough. Jason looked down at the bouquet again, the crushed white roses he no longer wanted to hold. They represented a dream that had died before it even began. He let his fingers loosen around the stems, and the flowers dropped onto the altar steps with a soft thud. A few guests gasped, maybe because they expected him to break down. But he didn't. Something else took its place, a spark of determination, born from his desperation to take this moment back. He looked at Sarah again. Really looked at her. A woman who had nothing to gain by standing near him. A woman who didn't judge him. A woman who stepped forward when everyone else stepped back. He didn't know why, but standing next to her felt like the first solid step he'd taken all day. "Sarah," he said quietly. She tilted her head.
"Yes."
Jason's mind raced through a dozen conflicting impulses, everything he should say, everything he shouldn't. Everything that made sense and everything that didn't. But one thought looped through all of them: I need to take control of my life again. Not later, not tomorrow. Now. Before he even fully processed the insanity of it, the words began forming. What if he paused, forcing himself to breathe? What if you stayed? What if you didn't just walk back to the last pew and disappear? Sarah frowned gently, unsure where he was going. "What are you saying?" she asked. Jason's heart pounded harder than when he had originally prepared to marry Vanessa. But this wasn't the same. There was no performance here, no expectations, no rehearsed lines. "Marry me." The air in the room shifted instantly. Guests gasped again, louder this time. Someone dropped their program. Someone else whispered, "What in the world?" under their breath. Even Father Donovan blinked as though he thought he misheard. Sarah stood absolutely still, her eyes widening, not in offense, but in shock so pure that it made Jason's throat tighten. She stared at him like she was trying to understand whether this was some cruel joke, some coping mechanism, or a genuine plea. "Jason," she said slowly, "you don't know me. I know that you were the only person who didn't look at me like I was broken." His voice was low, intense. "I know you walked up here when you could be stayed out of it. I know you re someone who feels deeply enough to care when no one else does." She shook her head, stunned. "But we've spoken for less than 5 minutes. And in those 5 minutes," he replied, "you showed me more humanity than Vanessa did in 3 years. Her breath caught. The words hit her harder than she expected. "I'm not asking because I think this is rational," Jason admitted. "I'm asking because I'm standing in the worst moment of my life, and you re the only person who made it feel survivable. I don't expect you to say yes. I need to take back something today. Something that's mine, something real." The guests erupted in whispers. The situation was spiraling into a scene out of a movie, messy, raw, unpredictable. Jason didn't even hear them anymore. His entire focus was locked on the woman in front of him. Sarah took a small step back, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. She wasn't a woman used to being seen, let alone being asked something as enormous as this. She lived her days in the shadows of a city that rarely noticed her unless it wanted to look away. And now, suddenly, the entire room was staring at her, waiting for her reaction. "Jason," she whispered, "you hurting? You trying to fix something that doesn't need to be fixed this way?" "I don't expect this to fix anything," he said, meeting her gaze. "But maybe it can start something new." She swallowed hard, her eyes darting between him and the stunned crowd. She didn't crave attention. She didn't crave rescue. She didn't crave dramatic gestures. What she craved, what she had been denied for so long, was a sense of worth. And right now, standing here, this powerful man everyone admired was asking her, seeing her, choosing her. The moment stretched thin between them. Sarah took a long breath, trying to steady her racing heart. "If I say yes, you understand my life isn't easy. I don't have anything to offer you. You offered me kindness," Jason said. "That's more than most people ever give." The church grew tense, the weight of expectation filling the air. Sarah closed her eyes for half a second, gathering herself. When she opened them, her expression held a quiet courage that Jason hadn't seen before. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes." The crowd gasped again, a ripple of astonishment echoing through the pews. Jason exhaled as though he'd been holding his breath for years. And just like that, in the ruins of a wedding gone wrong, a new and unimaginable path began to form, one neither of them had expected, but both were already stepping into. The moment Sarah breathed out her whispered yes, the atmosphere in Holy Grace Church shifted into something no one could quite define. It wasn't joy, it wasn't outrage. It was a stunned, electrified mixture of disbelief and fascination. A room full of people realizing they had just witnessed a twist dramatic enough to make any Hollywood screenwriter jealous. Guests sat frozen, eyes wide, mouths parted, fans half raised in midair. Even the stained glass windows seemed to glow differently, as if curious about the turn this day had taken. Father Donovan looked between the two of them, blinking in bewilderment. He had been a priest for over 3 decades, had seen runaway brides, cold-footed grooms, chaotic families, even a fistfight over bouquet placement, but nothing like this. Still, he was a man of duty, and Jason's voice cut through the tension with a steadiness that demanded order. "Father," Jason said, lifting his chin just slightly, "we ready to begin." Those words jolted the room. The phrase "we ready" wasn't spoken with hesitation or doubt. It came out anchored, even confident, as though Jason had reclaimed something powerful inside himself the second Sarah agreed. It wasn't the ceremony he had planned, but it was the only part of the day he now controlled. Sarah, still standing a few steps below him, inhaled slowly, gathering her courage. Her hands trembled not from fear of Jason, but from the enormity of what she had just stepped into. No one in that room knew her story, her hardships, the nights she spent on worn down bus benches or in homeless shelters, the years she struggled after losing her teaching job and her husband. But standing here, next to a man who had chosen her in the rawest moment of his life, she felt seen again, seen in a way that was both terrifying and empowering. Jason extended his hand toward her. Sarah hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. His grip was warm, steady, grounding. Someone in the far pew gasped again, and another muttered, "Good Lord," but neither Jason nor Sarah paid attention. When they stepped onto the altar together, the gesture didn't feel reckless, it felt strangely right. Like two people making a choice the world couldn't understand yet. Mrs. Miller, still seated in the front row, looked like she might faint. Her friends whispered urgently, trying to decipher what on earth was happening. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, her eyes darting between her son and this unfamiliar woman now standing at his side. Jason caught her expression, but he didn't waver. He gave her a subtle nod, not reassurance, not explanation, but a promise that he knew exactly what he was doing, even if the world thought he had lost his mind. Finally finding his voice, Father Donovan cleared his throat and opened the ceremonial script once more. "Very well," he said, regaining his composure. "If both parties wish to proceed, then we shall continue with the marriage rite." Jason and Sarah nodded in unison. The priest began with the opening words of the ceremony, though his voice carried a faint tremor of disbelief. Jason stood tall, shoulders squared, feeling for the first time that day like he wasn't being acted upon, he was acting. He wasn't the abandoned groom anymore. He was a man choosing a path, even a messy one, because taking action was better than letting humiliation define him. Sarah listened carefully to every word, her expression earnest. She wasn't pretending this wasn't insane. She knew it was. But she also knew what she was giving him in that moment: humanity. A lifeline. A way to stand up straight again. And deep down, she felt grateful too. For once, she wasn't invisible. Someone important saw her dignity, even when she barely recognized it herself. When it came time for the vow portion, Jason spoke first. His voice was firm, resonant. I, Jason Miller, take you, Sarah Brooks, to be my wife. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, or even the rest of today. But I know you stood with me when I had nothing but a broken moment, and that means something real. I promise to honor you, respect you, and face whatever comes next with honesty. Every guest leaned forward, stunned by the sincerity in his tone. The man who had been abandoned minutes earlier was now speaking vows with more conviction than half the couples they had seen marry. Sarah swallowed hard. She hadn't expected him to speak with such clarity. The weight of what she'd stepped into pressed on her, but not in a suffocating way, in a grounding way. She had been drifting for years, and now she was suddenly tethered to something she didn't quite understand yet. When it was her turn, she met Jason's eyes, letting the warmth she saw there strengthen her. I, Sarah Brooks, take you, Jason Miller, to be my husband. I never imagined I'd stand here today, and I don't know what I can give you except honesty and the best parts of myself, whatever they are. But I'll stand with you, the way I did today, whenever you need someone to face the hard moments with. Her voice cracked not with weakness, but with humanity. And Jason felt those words settle into him like soft earth catching a falling seed. His jaw tightened, not from emotion he wanted to hide, but from emotion he allowed himself to feel. The priest asked for the rings. Jason froze. The wedding bands he bought for Vanessa were sitting in the box on the small marble table nearby, mocking him with their symbolism. The moment could have grown awkward, but Sarah stepped forward before he could falter. It doesn't have to be a ring, she said softly. It just has to be a promise. Something flickered in Jason's expression: respect, admiration, maybe even awe. In a moment when everything could have spiraled into embarrassment again, she saved him with a single line. So be it, Father Donovan said, adjusting quickly. A symbolic gesture is acceptable. Jason took Sarah's hand gently and pressed his thumb over her knuckles, sealing his vow with a steady, deliberate touch. Sarah did the same, her thumb tracing a soft arc across his hand. The priest lifted his hands. By the power vested in me by the state of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife. A ripple moved through the crowd, equal parts shock, disbelief, and something that almost resembled reluctant awe. No one clapped. No one dared to. The moment was too surreal, too raw, too unpolished to fit into the usual celebration. Jason turned toward Sarah. She met his gaze with a mixture of courage and the faintest trace of fear. Neither of them knew what the next hour would bring, let alone the next year. But they were bound now not by romance or planning or tradition, but by choice born in chaos. You may kiss the bride, Father Donovan announced. Jason paused, giving Sarah time to refuse if she wished. But she stepped forward first, her eyes steady on his. The kiss was brief, gentle and tentative, yet it carried something unmistakably real, two lives colliding in the most unexpected way, choosing to move forward instead of collapsing. In that moment, Jason felt the first spark of something he hadn't expected to feel today: hope. Fragile, uncertain, but alive. And Sarah, standing in a place she never imagined she'd belong, felt something she'd been denied for a long time: worth. Their lives had just taken a turn no one could have predicted. But in the mess of broken plans and shattered expectations, something new had begun, wild, unplanned, and strangely beautiful. The drive from Holy Grace Church to Jason's home in West Austin felt like a strange transition between two worlds, one filled with confusion and shock, the other quiet and unsettling in its normalcy. The luxury SUV glided down the rain-darkened streets, its engine humming evenly. But the air inside the car carried a heavy mix of emotions neither Jason nor Sarah fully knew how to handle. They had gone from absolute strangers to husband and wife in less than an hour. And the reality of that truth was settling over them like a weight neither could escape. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, hands folded tightly in her lap, staring out the window as buildings blurred past. She had seen Austin thousands of times before, walked its sidewalks, rested on its bus stops, navigated its shelters, but she had never experienced the city this way. riding in a car like this next to a man like Jason. With a ringless marriage that had been sealed in front of people who had even known her name it, felt unreal. Almost like she had stepped into someone else's life by mistake. She kept waiting for reality to snap back, for someone to call her a fraud, for the world to correct itself. But every time she glanced at the simple marriage band Jason had improvised earlier, the symbolic mark still lingering on her hand, she was reminded that no, this was real, as real as the pounding of her heart. Jason kept his eyes on the road, though his thoughts were spinning wildly. Every turn of the steering wheel felt heavy. His tuxedo collar felt too tight. His hands didn't feel like his own. He wasn't a man who acted impulsively. His company thrived because he analyzed every angle, anticipated every outcome, controlled as many variables as humanly possible. And yet today, in front of 200 witnesses, he had tossed logic aside and asked a complete stranger to marry him. Not because he wanted a show, not because he wanted revenge, but because in that moment, Sarah had been the only person who reminded him he was human, not just a man who had been publicly humiliated. "Are you okay?" Jason finally asked, his voice low but steady. Sarah looked over, startled he had spoken. "I'm processing," she replied. "This is a lot." He nodded once. "Yeah, it is." She hesitated before asking, "Do you regret it?" Jason tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "No. I regret what happened before it. Not this." Sarah studied him, unsure whether to believe him, but something about his tone carried honesty that made her chest loosen by a fraction. When they reached his gated driveway, Sarah's breath caught. The property was sprawling, far larger than anything she'd ever stepped foot on, lined with stone pathways, trimmed hedges, and soft outdoor lights that illuminated the modern architecture of the house. It looked like something pulled from a magazine: a dark glass, smooth concrete, warm wooden elements, and a wide entrance framed by tall windows. "This is where you live?" Sarah asked, not hiding her surprise. "Yeah," Jason said quietly. "Home." It was the first time she heard hesitance in his voice all day. As though he suddenly realized how different their lives were. As though he wondered if he had dragged her into something too big, too unfamiliar, too overwhelming. He parked and stepped out, moving around to open Sarah's door. She tried to protest. She wasn't used to anyone doing things for her, but he shook his head lightly, insisting without words. When her feet touched the spotless stone driveway, she felt out of place instantly. The rain had dampened the hem of her coat, and a small puddle formed beneath the worn soles of her boots. She felt like a smudge on a perfect canvas. Jason walked beside her toward the entrance, keeping a respectful distance, unsure whether she wanted closeness or space. He typed in a code, the door clicked open, and warm interior lighting spilled out onto the steps. Inside, the house was spacious, quiet, and tastefully decorated. The living room held a large sectional sofa, framed artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the backyard. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and clean linen. It felt like a curated life, a space designed with intention. Sarah froze at the threshold, suddenly terrified to step inside. "Jason, I don't think I belong here." He turned to her, expression softening. "You re my wife now. You belong wherever I am." The words were strange, unexpected, and not entirely comforting, but they held a sincerity that made her step forward. She knew he wasn't trying to romance her. He was trying to reassure her, to ease the discomfort he could sense radiating off her. Once inside, Sarah removed her damp coat, folding it awkwardly over her arm. She hesitated, unsure where to put it. Jason noticed, took it gently from her hands, and hung it on the rack near the door. "You don't have to be nervous," he said, though he knew why she was. Even he felt the tension curling in his stomach. They were strangers bound by an impulsive decision, and the house, his domain, only emphasized the differences between them. Sarah's eyes drifted to the pristine floors and expensive decor. "Everything is so clean," she whispered. Jason raised an eyebrow, almost amused. "Is that a bad thing?" "No," she said quickly, "it's just new." He nodded, understanding more than he had expected himself to. "I want you to feel comfortable here. It's your home too." Sarah looked around again. "It's going to take time." "That's fine," he replied. "We have time." They stood there in the entryway, neither knowing what to do next. The reality of their situation was settling in, not the romanticized version people envisioned on wedding days, but the raw, complicated truth of two people who barely knew each other binding their futures together. Jason gestured toward the living room. "You can sit wherever you want." She stepped forward slowly, unsure of everything she touched. She sat on the edge of the couch, back straight, hands folded neatly in her lap, as though afraid to sink into the cushions. Jason loosened his tie and sat on the opposite side, leaving space, not wanting to crowd her. He studied her quietly, the exhaustion in her eyes, the uncertainty in her posture, the lingering rain in her hair. She wasn't polished or rehearsed. She wasn't pretending, and he found that strangely calming. "I know this is unusual," he said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "You don't owe me anything. Not devotion, not affection, not some picture-perfect marriage." Sarah blinked at him, surprised by his candor. "I don't expect you to suddenly feel like you belong in this house," he added, "or in my life. We'll figure it out. Step by step." Sarah lowered her gaze. "I'm scared." "I am too," he admitted. She looked up sharply, not expecting that. Jason Miller wasn't the type of man who admitted fear easily. But here he was, sitting in his own living room, confessing it to her. "And that's okay," he said. "We can be scared together." A small laugh escaped her, a soft, tired sound that felt like the first crack of light in a dark room. Jason didn't smile often, but he felt something warm tug at his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked. "For not making me feel like I'm a mistake." Jason exhaled, leaning back. "You were not a mistake, Sarah. Today was a mess. But you were the only part of it that felt real." She met his eyes, and in that moment, something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two broken people standing at the edge of something neither had planned for, yet both were willing to face. Jason stood and extended his hand. "Come on, I'll show you the guest room. You can stay there until you're ready to figure out what comes next." Sarah took his hand, and for the first time since the wedding, they walked not as two strangers thrown together by chaos, but as two people beginning a story neither had expected. The guest room sat at the far end of the hallway, a space Jason rarely used except when his mother stayed over or when business partners visited from out of state. It was clean, sparsely decorated, and with its soft beige walls and neatly arranged linens, it felt far more inviting than the worn cots and crowded shelters Sarah had grown used to over the past few years. Even so, stepping into it made her stomach twist. She felt like an intruder wandering into a life too polished, too stable, too carefully maintained. The contrast between her world and Jason's wasn't just visible, it was overwhelming. Jason walked a few steps ahead, stopping by the doorway and flipping on the light. He remained still for a moment before speaking. "You can stay here tonight. Or longer if you need. There's no rush to figure everything out." Sarah hovered near the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself not for warmth, but out of habit, the kind she'd developed to protect herself from unpredictable environments. "I don't want to take your space," she said softly. "It's yours now too," he replied, though even he seemed surprised by the phrasing. They both understood it wasn't literally true yet, not in the emotional sense, but legally and practically, her life was now entangled with his. The thought unsettled them both in different ways. Jason stepped aside to give her room. Sarah entered slowly, eyes sweeping over the neatly made bed, the folded blanket at its foot, the small reading lamp on the nightstand. She touched nothing, as though afraid she might disrupt the order. "You can shower if you want," Jason offered. "Bathroom's just down the hall. I can find you something to wear for the night." Sarah nodded. "Thank you." He hesitated at the doorway, hands in his pockets, posture tense. "If you need anything, water, food, just let me know." "I will," she replied, though she doubted she'd have the courage to ask for anything. Jason left, and Sarah finally allowed herself to exhale. She felt the weight of the day hit her all at once. The chaotic church, the spontaneous vows, the intense stares of the guests, the drive through the rain, it all crashed into her like a wave. And she sat on the edge of the bed before her knees could give out. She glanced around again. There were no personal touches, no photos, no signs of Jason's history. It made sense, he barely used this room. But for her, the emptiness felt like a blessing. No reminders of the life she didn't belong to. No reminders of the life she lost. After a few moments, she stood and made her way to the bathroom, clutching her bag. The warm water that poured from the showerhead felt almost surreal as it washed over her. For months her showers had been quick, timed, often cold, shared with dozens of other women in shelter facilities. Here, she could stand as long as she wanted. She let the water run through her hair, down her back, feeling layers of exhaustion melt away. Jason stood in the hallway on the opposite end, leaning against the wall outside his bedroom, listening to the faint sound of the shower running. He wasn't trying to intrude, he was trying to ground himself. The reality of what he had done pressed on him in waves. He had married a stranger, not just someone he barely knew, someone whose life was nothing like his own. He had acted on instinct, emotion, desperation. Yet when he pictured her standing beside him, offering him support when everyone else hesitated, he felt no regret. Confusion, yes. Uncertainty, absolutely, but not regret. He went to his bedroom, rummaged through drawers until he found a soft cotton t-shirt and a pair of drawstring lounge pants. They would be loose on her, but comfortable. He folded them neatly and set them on the guest room bed. When Sarah returned, her damp hair curled softly around her face, and she wore her old clothes, which were cleaner but still worn. She paused when she saw the folded clothes waiting for her. "You didn't have to do this," she murmured when Jason appeared at the doorway. "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." Sarah hesitated again, unsure how to navigate the growing complexity between them. Jason sensed it too, and he stepped back to give her space. "I'll be downstairs for a bit," he said, "if you want anything." She nodded but didn't speak, watching him retreat down the hall. The house felt vast after he left. Too big to understand, too quiet to feel comfortable. Sarah changed into the clothes he'd given her, surprised by how soft they felt against her skin. She folded her old clothes by habit, placing them neatly on the chair. Then she sat on the bed again, staring at the closed door. Part of her wanted to stay hidden here. Another part, one she hadn't listened to in years, wanted to see where Jason had gone. Meanwhile, Jason was downstairs, sitting on the edge of the couch with a glass of water. He had no intention of drinking. He couldn't focus on anything. His mind replayed the events of the day over and over, each time more unreal than the last. The church. Vanessa running, Sarah stepping forward, the vows, the drive home. And now this, the quiet expectation of sharing a home with someone he had known for barely an hour. He didn't expect feelings to form. He didn't expect trust to appear out of thin air. But he did expect honesty, and he intended to offer her that. He didn't hear her soft footsteps as she came downstairs. He only looked up when he sensed movement. Sarah stood at the bottom of the staircase, unsure whether she was interrupting. Jason sat up straighter. "Do you want to sit?" he asked. She nodded and moved toward the couch, choosing the opposite end again. The distance didn't bother him. It felt appropriate. They sat there for a moment, neither speaking, not because they didn't want to, but because they didn't know where to begin. Jason finally inhaled and broke the tension. "I don't want you to feel like you're here because you owe me anything," he said. "You're not a project. You're not a placeholder. And you're not something I'm using to fix my pride." Sarah looked at him quietly. "Then why did you ask me?" Jason rubbed the back of his neck. "Because when everything fell apart, you were the only person who didn't treat me like I was pitiful or embarrassing. You saw me as human. And I needed that more than anything." Sarah absorbed his words, feeling something gentle tug in her chest. Her voice softened. "I stood with you because I know what it feels like when everyone watches you fall." Jason's posture eased. "I think that's why this works, at least for now." Sarah nodded. "Maybe." He finally allowed himself a small smile, real and unforced. "We were going to figure this out. No expectations. No pressure. Just two people trying to make sense of something crazy." She didn't smile, but her expression warmed, a faint glimmer of trust replacing the hesitation. "Okay," she whispered. "We'll figure it out." Jason leaned back, feeling a weight lift from him. It wasn't a solution, it wasn't clarity, but it was a start. And as Sarah shifted slightly closer, not enough to touch, but enough to show she wasn't afraid of him, Jason felt something unfamiliar settle inside him. Comfort. Not certainty. Not passion. Not destiny. Just comfort. And for the first night in a long time, that was enough. Morning light crept through the blinds in thin golden stripes, painting soft patterns across the guest room walls. Sarah blinked awake slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar softness beneath her. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The bed was too comfortable, the air too warm, the quiet too peaceful. Then the memories surged back: the church, Jason's hand reaching for hers, the vows spoken in front of stunned strangers, the ride home, the awkward conversation on the couch. Her breath caught. She was married. Married to a man she barely knew. Married to a man whose house looked like a magazine cover, and whose life felt far removed from the world she had been living in for years. She sat up and ran a hand through her tangled hair, reminding herself that this wasn't a dream she could ignore. The clothes Jason had given her lay neatly folded on the chair. Her old clothes were stacked on top of them. It was strangely grounding. She dressed slowly, trying to shake off the unease coiling in her stomach. She wasn't used to waking up in a place where she wasn't worried about being asked to leave. That alone made her chest feel tight. Downstairs, Jason stood in the kitchen, staring at 2 mugs of coffee like they were bomb wires he had to choose between. He hadn't slept much. His mind had been a restless carousel all night, spinning through thoughts he couldn't arrange into anything coherent. He'd gotten up early out of habit, made coffee out of routine, and now stood barefoot on his polished hardwood floor wondering what a married man was supposed to do on the morning after a wedding like his. Do you greet your new wife? Do you wait? Do you pretend everything is normal? He took a breath and reminded himself that he wasn't dealing with normal circumstances. Nothing about yesterday had been conventional, but he had made a promise to handle this with honesty, patience, and respect. So he poured 2 cups, added cream to one and left the other black, hoping she would pick whichever one she liked. He heard footsteps, soft and hesitant, and turned to find Sarah standing at the entry to the kitchen. Her damp hair from the shower she must have taken earlier fell around her shoulders, and she looked unsure whether she was intruding. "Good morning," Jason said, attempting a gentle tone. She offered a faint nod. "Morning." He lifted one of the mugs. "Not sure how you take your coffee, so I made options." Sarah blinked, almost startled by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she murmured, stepping closer. She chose the mug with cream, wrapping both hands around it like it was a small anchor. Jason leaned against the counter opposite her. The kitchen was large but suddenly felt too small, filled with unspoken questions neither of them knew how to voice. They sipped their coffee in quiet concentration, not for lack of things to say, but because everything they could say felt too big, too heavy, too complicated for their first morning together. "I hope the room was okay," Jason finally said. "It was nice," Sarah answered. "More than nice, thank you." He nodded, though he felt the tension still thick between them. She stood rigidly, shoulders tight. He could see the way she avoided looking directly at the expensive appliances, the marble countertops, the glass pantry door. Every inch of the house reminded her how different their worlds were. "Are you hungry?" he asked, gesturing toward the fridge. "I can make breakfast." Her eyes widened. "You cook?" He huffed a faint laugh. "Only on days that require recovery." It was meant to be a joke, and surprisingly, Sarah's lips tugged into a small smile. It was brief, faint, but it warmed something inside him. He took eggs from the fridge, grabbed a pan, and began cooking. Sarah sat at the island counter, still gripping her mug like a lifeline. As Jason cracked eggs, whisked, and cooked them into soft scrambled folds, Sarah watched with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. "You don't have to do all this," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I want to start the day without chaos." "I appreciate it," she whispered. Jason served the food onto 2 plates and slid one toward her. She picked up the fork slowly, almost cautiously. 1 bite later, her eyes widened again. "This is good," she said, genuinely surprised. He chuckled. "I will take that as a win." As they ate, the atmosphere softened, tension fading into something more manageable. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it wasn't fear either. They sat across from each other like 2 travelers stranded together, sharing the same fire for the night. Then the front door opened. Jason's heart dropped. "Oh no." Sarah tensed instantly. "Who?" "My mother," he muttered. "She has a key." Before Sarah could react, Mrs. Miller's voice carried through the foyer. Jason, you cannot possibly expect me to." She stopped abruptly as she entered the kitchen. Her gaze landed on Sarah, then shifted to Jason, then to the 2 plates of breakfast. "Oh dear God," she breathed. Sarah stiffened, fingers tightening around her fork. Jason moved quickly. "Mom," he said firmly, "sit down." "I most certainly will not sit down." She snapped, her eyes blazing. "You married a stranger yesterday? And now she's having breakfast in my house." "My house." The words stung Sarah, even though she knew they weren't meant for her. "Her name is Sarah," Jason said sharply, "and yes, she's here. She lives here now." Mrs. Miller pressed a hand to her forehead, pacing. "Jason, you cannot expect me to accept this. Do you understand how this looks? What people are already saying?" Jason straightened his posture. "I don't care. I do, she exclaimed. Then her eyes softened not with kindness but with worry. Jason, you were hurt. You weren't thinking clearly. That may be true, he admitted. But I know what I'm doing now. Mrs. Miller turned to Sarah. Her expression was stern, wary, and full of judgment, but also tinged with concern. Do you understand what you've gotten yourself into? She asked coldly. Sarah met her gaze, forcing her voice steady. I understand that he needed someone to stand with him yesterday, and I did. That doesn't make you a wife, Mrs. Miller countered. It makes her the woman who helped me when no one else did, Jason said. Mrs. Miller stared at him, stunned by the conviction in his voice. Finally, she sank into a chair, defeated. I just want you to be happy, she whispered. I know, Jason replied. But you have to trust me to figure out what that means. Mrs. Miller rubbed her temples. I need time. So does she, Jason said, glancing at Sarah. Sarah remained silent, unsure whether she belonged in this conversation, or whether she should excuse herself. Jason noticed and gently touched her hand, a small gesture, but enough to anchor her. Mrs. Miller saw it. Her expression shifted, still conflicted, but no longer hostile. Something about the way Sarah reacted to Jason's touch, not with entitlement, but with cautious gratitude, seemed to soften her opinion. Fine, she said at last, I will try, but this is a lot. We know, Jason replied. Sarah lowered her gaze, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. Having breakfast with her new husband was already dizzying. Facing his mother felt impossible. Yet she had done it. She had stayed in the room. She had spoken. She had not run. And Jason noticed. He turned to her after his mother left the kitchen. Thank you, he said softly, for staying. Sarah exhaled slowly. I didn't know if I should. I'm glad you did. For the first time that morning, her shoulders relaxed. It wasn't love. It wasn't comfort. But it was progress. And for both of them, that was enough. That first week in Jason's house felt like stepping into a world Sarah had seen only through windows and passing car reflections. Everything was too neat, too expensive, too intentional. The walls were painted in warm earth tones, the furniture looked untouched, and the appliances were sleek pieces of technology she wasn't entirely sure she was allowed to touch. Every morning, she woke up before dawn, half expecting someone to shake her shoulder and tell her she couldn't stay there. Every night, she fell asleep with the fear that she was one wrong move away from being asked to leave. Jason tried not to overwhelm her. He kept his routine steady, making coffee in the morning, answering emails at the kitchen island, leaving for meetings around 9. Coming home late afternoon, he didn't smother her with questions, nor did he treat her like she was fragile. He just gave her space. Maybe too much space. Because without someone guiding her through the new environment, Sarah often felt lost. The house was too big. She got turned around twice trying to find the laundry room. On the second day, she opened a pantry door and thought it was a closet meant for jackets. She walked into the wrong bathroom twice. She didn't touch the living room television because she was afraid of breaking it. She didn't sit on any furniture except the island stool in her bed. And she refused to eat anything unless Jason offered food first. One afternoon, Jason walked in the kitchen and found Sarah wiping the counter for the third time, even though it was already spotless. She scrubbed with the intensity of someone trying to erase her fingerprints, from a place she didn't feel she deserved to inhabit. You okay? Jason asked, trying to keep his voice gentle. She startled, dropping the cloth. Yes, sorry, I was just cleaning. It already looked clean. She picked up the cloth again. I didn't want it to seem like I wasn't helping. Helping isn't required, he said softly. This isn't a job you need to earn. Sarah froze, the cloth halfway to the sink. I don't want to be a burden. Jason frowned. You're not a burden. But she didn't believe him. He could see it in the way her shoulders tightened. In the way she avoided eye contact. In the way she kept herself small, as if trying not to take up space in a house large enough to lose her in. Later that night, Jason walked past the guest room and found her sitting on the floor, folding laundry into perfect rectangles. Except the laundry wasn't hers, it was his. She had gone through the hamper without asking. He leaned against the doorframe. You don't have to do that. She didn't look up. I needed to be useful. You were my wife, he reminded her carefully. Not my housekeeper. Her hands paused over a t-shirt. I don't know what being your wife means. He didn't have an answer. Not a clear one. Not yet. But he stepped into the room and crouched slightly so she'd look at him. It means sharing space. It means giving each other time. It means figuring this out together, even if it's messy. That's enough for now. Her eyes softened with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. She nodded, folding the last shirt before standing. Jason picked up the basket for her. Come on, let's put these away. They walked down the hall together, and for the first time that week, the distance between them didn't feel as wide. The next day, Jason caught her studying herself in the living room mirror. She wasn't admiring herself, she was assessing. Tugging at the oversized clothes he had given her, smoothing the fabric, trying to decide if she looked out of place in his world. When she noticed him, she stepped away quickly, as if embarrassed. You don't have to hide, Jason said. It's okay to get comfortable here. She offered a small, uncertain smile. I'm trying. He nodded, resisting the urge to say more. He had learned to give her space to process things at her own pace. But he also noticed little details, how she always took the smallest portion of food, how she stood when he entered a room, how she apologized before speaking, as though expecting reprimand. He paid attention. On Thursday, Jason returned home early from work. When he walked in, he heard faint noises coming from the backyard. Curious, he stepped outside. There, near the garden, was Sarah, kneeling in the soft earth, hands dirty, sleeves pushed up. She was pulling weeds with the careful precision of someone who needed something to focus on. The garden itself was simple rose bushes his mother insisted he plant years ago, a few stone pots, and a lemon tree that never produced fruit. Sarah's presence somehow made the space feel warmer, more lived in. Jason approached slowly. Never took you for a gardener. She looked up, brushing hair from her face. I'm not. But I used to plant flowers with my husband, my old husband Robert. It made me feel normal. Jason watched her for a moment. The way her fingers worked gently, the way her shoulders finally seemed to relax. You don't have to explain, he said softly. She exhaled, relieved that he didn't pry. You can make this garden yours if you want, he added. Do whatever you like with it. Her eyes widened slightly. I can. He nodded. You live here now. You should have something that feels like yours. A small warmth bloomed in her expression. Thank you. Jason sat on the patio steps, watching her work, not to supervise, but because something about being near her felt grounding. She didn't fill the air with unnecessary words. She didn't demand explanations. She didn't treat him like a broken man trying to piece his pride together. She treated him like someone she respected but didn't fear. At dinner, an unexpected moment happened. Jason made grilled chicken and vegetables, and Sarah took her usual small portion. He frowned. You know you can eat more, right? She froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. I don't want to take too much. You're not taking anything from me, he said gently. This food is for both of us. She hesitated, then took a second helping. It was small, but it mattered. Later that night, as Jason passed the guest room, he noticed something new. The door was cracked open, not wide, but just enough that he could see. She didn't feel the need to hide anymore. She sat on the bed reading a book he hadn't seen her bring in. It must have been from his shelf. He knocked softly. Sarah looked up, startled, then relaxed. Book okay? He asked. Yes, she said. I forgot how much I missed reading. Jason leaned against the doorway. You know, I've been thinking. Sarah straightened, anxious. About what? He smiled faintly. We don't have to rush into defining anything. Not marriage, not roles, not expectations. We'll just live. And figure it out at a pace that doesn't scare either of us. Sarah's shoulders eased. I'd like that. He nodded, lingering a moment before stepping away. Good night, Sarah. She hesitated, then said softly, good night, Jason. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. But it was the first night she didn't feel like a guest. And for Jason, it was the first night he realized he didn't want her to feel like one ever again. 2 weeks after the unexpected wedding, the rhythm of Jason and Sarah's shared life had settled into something neither of them could label. They were not quite a couple, not quite strangers, and not quite friends. Yet something quietly steady had started building between them, something that felt like trust forming grain by grain. Sarah still woke up early every morning, often before the sun lifted over the cedar trees lining the neighborhood. She would brew coffee, always careful to portion it so she didn't use too much, and often spent the first hour sitting on the patio, listening to the wind rustle through the garden she'd started tending. Jason found himself adjusting his schedule to pass through the kitchen at the same time she was returning from the backyard. He pretended it was habit, but the truth was he liked catching those first soft traces of calm on her face after she'd spent time with the plants. She always greeted him shyly, as though still afraid she might not be welcome, and he always made sure to greet her back in a way that proved she was. Their interactions were small but meaningful. Jason had never lived with someone who moved through his home like she was afraid of disturbing its balance. Sarah had never lived with someone who noticed even the smallest shifts in her mood. They danced around each other for days, adjusting a step at a time, but the outside world wasn't as gentle. It began at the grocery store. Jason had taken Sarah with him on a Saturday morning, wanting to give her a chance to choose foods she liked. At first, she kept her hands close to her sides, afraid to touch anything. Jason nudged her gently. "You can add things to the cart," he said. "It's okay." She hesitated before picking up a loaf of bread, focusing far too hard on the ingredient label. Jason didn't push. He simply waited, letting her find her footing. They were halfway down the produce aisle when two women approached, regulars from Jason's gym. He recognized them instantly. So did Sarah, though she didn't know their names. She sensed their judgment the moment they spotted Jason beside a woman wearing worn sneakers and a borrowed t-shirt. "Jason," one of them chirped, "we heard about the wedding." Her tone was exaggerated sweetness, like honey poured over shards of glass. Sarah lowered her gaze immediately. Jason offered a polite nod. "Morning." "And this must be the woman," continued, pretending to search for the right term. "Your new wife." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. She stepped slightly behind Jason without meaning to. "Yes," Jason said firmly, "her name is Sarah." The women exchanged glances. One of them murmured something like, "Oh," as though she had stumbled into a private joke. Then one leaned closer. "Well, if you ever need a real bridal shower, let us know," she said with a tight smile. Jason's jaw tightened. "We were fine." They walked away, whispering before they were fully out of earshot. Sarah kept her eyes on the floor. "I shouldn't have come," she whispered. "You absolutely should have," Jason responded, his tone unwavering. "Those women don't define anything." She didn't look convinced. The next day, a similar thing happened at the coffee shop. Then again at the hardware store. People stared. Some whispered. Others directly questioned Jason, asking why he had done something so impulsive. A few were bold enough to suggest he was having some sort of breakdown. Jason brushed them off, but Sarah couldn't. She felt every look like a needle pressing into her skin. On the walk home from the coffee shop, she finally voiced it. "They think I'm wrong for you." Jason stopped mid-step. "I don't care what they think." "But I do," she murmured. "I didn't ask for any of this attention. And I don't want to make things harder for you." "You're not," he insisted. She lifted her chin just slightly. "I'm the woman you married on a day people still talk about. They won't forget that." Jason exhaled. "Maybe they shouldn't." Sarah blinked, confused. "Why?" "Because you were the only honest moment in the entire chaos," he answered. "And I'm not ashamed of that." Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. It was one of the first moments she realized Jason didn't see her through the lens everyone else did. He saw her kindness, her courage, her humanity. And though she wasn't sure what she meant to him yet, she knew she meant something real. Their bond deepened in small, unexpected ways. One evening, Sarah cooked dinner for the first time. Simple pasta, nothing fancy. She had spent the afternoon nervously reading recipes on Jason's tablet, afraid she'd ruin something. When he took the first bite and his eyes widened with genuine surprise, she panicked. "Is it okay?" she asked. "It's great," he said, and the smile that followed wasn't polite or forced. It was warm. It was sincere. It reached his eyes in a way she hadn't seen before. Another night, Jason found her on the patio bench, knees drawn to her chest as she stared up at the sky. She rarely let herself relax, but the starlight softened her features. "You look peaceful," he said. She shook her head lightly. "I'm trying to remember what that feels like." He sat beside her, not close enough to crowd her, but close enough that she felt he wanted to understand. "Peace takes time," he said. "And you've had to fight through more than most people ever will." She glanced at him. "You don't know everything yet." He met her gaze. "I'm willing to learn." The words hit her unexpectedly hard. No one had ever offered to learn her story before, not without judgment, not without pity. She looked down, blinking back the sting building in her chest. Jason didn't push. He simply stayed beside her until the cool air carried away the heaviness of whatever she had been holding inside. As days passed, their dynamic shifted in subtle but unmistakable ways. Jason started leaving sticky notes on the fridge with reminders like "Don't forget to eat" or "Garden looks great." Sarah started leaving small things for him too, a mug prepped with coffee grounds before he woke up, a neatly folded jacket by the door when she saw rain in the forecast, a freshly watered houseplant he'd forgotten existed. Little acts of care. Little confirmations that they weren't just sharing a house, they were sharing a life. One evening, as Jason worked on his laptop at the dining table, Sarah approached holding a book she'd found in his office, a worn philosophy title with the spine nearly broken. "You like reading things like this?" she asked. He smiled. "When I have the patience." She sat across from him. "Could you recommend something for me?" Jason closed his laptop slowly. "Sure, but only if we read it together." Her eyebrows rose. "Together?" "Yeah," he said. "You tell me your thoughts, I'll tell you mine." It sounded simple, but Sarah felt the offer settle in her heart with surprising weight. It meant time. It meant interest. It meant partnership, not the legal kind they stumbled into, but the human kind that grew through conversation and trust. "Okay," she said, "I'd like that." Jason nodded, and for the first time since their chaotic wedding day, they shared a look that carried something more than circumstance, something more than responsibility, something close to connection. And as Sarah watched him choose a book from the shelf, she realized she wasn't just adjusting to this home. She was slowly becoming part of it. Sarah was trimming the lemon tree when she first sensed something was wrong. The breeze was normal, the late morning sun was warm, and Jason's car wasn't due back for another hour. But a strange tension drifted through the air, the kind that prickled against her skin before she even understood why. She wiped dirt from her hands just as she heard the sharp sound of heels striking the front walkway. When Sarah rounded the corner of the house, she froze. Vanessa Reed stood at the end of the stone path, dressed in a fitted cream blazer and pencil skirt, her hair perfectly styled, her posture straight enough to slice through glass. She looked like the cover of a wedding magazine, sharp, elegant, polished. Everything Sarah wasn't. Vanessa's eyes swept over her deliberately, landing on the garden gloves, the dirt under her nails, the oversized t-shirt, the torn sneakers. The corner of her mouth lifted in a look Sarah recognized immediately, judgment mixed with amusement. "So it's true," Vanessa said coolly. "You really married her." Sarah swallowed hard. "Jason isn't home right now." "That's fine," Vanessa replied, brushing imaginary dust from her sleeve. "I'm actually here to see you." Sarah didn't know where to stand or how to hold herself. Vanessa walked closer, stopping just a few feet from her. "You must think this is some kind of fairy tale," Vanessa said. "The rich, heartbroken groom, the kind stranger, the dramatic wedding rescue." She lifted her brows. "Did you rehearse that?" Sarah's breath hitched. "No." "Right," Vanessa said flatly, "because it was all real. So real that you magically ended up with a house, a husband, and a place you never belonged." Sarah felt every word like a stab. Before she could respond, the front door opened. Jason stepped out, stopping instantly when he saw Vanessa on the walkway facing Sarah. "What are you doing here?" Vanessa turned smoothly. "I came to talk. We have unfinished business." "We don't," Jason said sharply. "Jason, don't be dramatic," she said. "We need to clear the air." He moved to Sarah's side, giving Vanessa a cold stare. "Whatever you want to say it and go." Vanessa's gaze slid between the two of them. "I made a mistake," she said. "I panicked that day. I wasn't ready for marriage, but that doesn't mean I didn't love you." Sarah stiffened slightly, but Jason didn't waver. "You didn't panic," he said, "you ran." Vanessa ignored the correction. "This arrangement," she gestured toward Sarah, "isn't the answer, Jason. You married someone you met 5 minutes earlier. The entire city is talking." Jason's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. And you refine with ruining your reputation." Vanessa pressed. "My reputation survived just fine without you," he shot back. Vanessa's confidence flickered for the first time. She took a small breath and lowered her voice. "Jason, we had plans. A future. You can't tell me a part of you doesn't want that back." Jason looked at her, then at Sarah, who was quietly shrinking into herself, gripping one glove with trembling fingers. "I don't want the future we planned," he said. "That future was built on things you didn't mean." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "You think she's the answer?" She turned to Sarah, stepping closer. "What exactly did you offer him?" "Sympathy. A convenient escape. Do you know how ridiculous this marriage looks from the outside?" Jason stepped forward enough. Vanessa laughed softly. Jason, you re-smart, successful, you know this won't last. Sarah felt a sting in her chest, not because Vanessa was right, but because deep down, part of her feared the same thing. She had told herself again and again that she wasn't a replacement, wasn't a mistake, wasn't temporary. But hearing Vanessa say it out loud shattered something fragile inside her. Jason noticed her expression shift. Sarah, he said quietly, you don't have to listen to this. But Vanessa wasn't done. You're not his equal, she said. You never will be. You think this house, this life is yours now. Jason needs someone who can handle everything that comes with him: wealth, appearance, responsibility. She paused. You can barely handle a grocery store. Sarah flinched. Jason's eyes darkened with anger. Vanessa, leave now. She tilted her head. So that's it. Our history means nothing. You made that decision, Jason said. Vanessa's face hardened. You'll regret this, she snapped. Both of you. And with that, she turned sharply and walked down the driveway, heels clicking decisively until her luxury car door slammed shut and the engine roared to life. When she was gone, the air felt heavy. Sarah's breath came shallow, her throat tight. She stared at the ground, unable to lift her eyes. Jason turned to her immediately. You okay? He asked. She nodded, but the motion was shaky. I'm fine. You're not, he said gently, and that's okay. Sarah tried to step back, needing space, but Jason reached out and lightly touched her arm. It wasn't forceful, just a quiet attempt to anchor her. You don't have to believe anything she said, he told her. She's trying to undo something that already ended. Sarah's voice trembled. She's not wrong about all of it. Yes, she is, Jason insisted. Sarah shook her head. Jason, look at me. She gestured at her worn clothes, her dirt-stained hands, the garden residue still clinging to her. And look at her. Jason stepped closer. I did, and I still choose you. Her breath caught. I don't understand why. Because you were real, he said. Because you stand beside people instead of judging them. Because you didn't run when things were hard. She closed her eyes. You barely know me. I know enough. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it quickly, embarrassed. Jason's expression softened. Sarah, you're not a placeholder. She didn't answer right away. The weight of Vanessa's words still hung around her, clinging like cold fog. Jason gently lifted her chin so she would look at him. You didn't steal my life. You saved me from losing myself. A small, unsteady breath escaped her. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to being defended. She wasn't used to someone choosing her, not out of desperation or circumstance, but because they saw something worth holding on to. Jason lowered his hand. Come inside, he said softly. We'll figure this out. Sarah nodded slowly, following him back inside the house that still felt too big for her, but for the first time, the doorway didn't make her hesitate. That night, as Jason checked on her before bed, he paused in the hall, watching her from afar. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, still quietly shaken. But she wasn't hiding. She wasn't running. She was staying. And Jason realized something important. Vanessa hadn't shaken their foundation. She had revealed how strong it was becoming. The next morning, Jason arrived at his office early, hoping to bury himself in work. He needed something concrete to anchor his thoughts after yesterday's encounter with Vanessa. But when he stepped into the sleek lobby of Miller Constructive Solutions, the tension hit him immediately. His assistant, Lindsay, looked up from her desk with wide eyes. She's here, Lindsay whispered. Jason stopped mid-stride. Who? Lindsay's expression shifted apologetically. Vanessa, she's in your office. She said she wouldn't leave until she spoke to you. Jason let out a slow breath, not out of defeat, but out of irritation. He thanked Lindsay and headed down the hall, mentally bracing himself. When he pushed open the door, Vanessa was already standing by the window, arms crossed, ankle tilted, posture sharpened like a weapon. She turned as though she'd been rehearsing her entrance. Jason, she said, stepping toward him, we need to fix this, all of it. He closed the door behind him. We don't need to fix anything. You ended it. Vanessa shook her head. I panicked. My mother was pressuring me. The wedding felt too big, too fast. I wasn't ready. And you think running out of the church was the solution? He asked coldly. You humiliated me in front of everyone. Vanessa's expression softened strategically. I made a mistake. That's why I'm here, to make things right. Jason crossed his arms. What does make things right mean to you? Vanessa reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. She placed it on the desk, sliding it toward him. I'm offering you a partnership, she said. My father is ready to sign a $3 million contract with your company if you annul the marriage. And before you accuse me of trying to buy you off, understand that this is business. Opportunities like this don't just appear twice. Jason stared at the folder, then at her, almost amused by how little she understood him. You think I married Sarah for money? He asked. No, Vanessa said quickly. I think you married her out of shock. And when that shock wears off, you'll realize this. She gestured at the folder is the life you built. The life you deserve. Jason didn't respond immediately. He walked to the desk, opened the folder, and scanned the numbers. It was a huge opportunity, massive, even. His company could grow by 20% overnight with this single deal. But he closed the folder calmly and pushed it back toward her. No, Vanessa stiffened. Jason, don't be rash. You're throwing away your future. My future is mine to define, he said. Not yours, not your father's, and not through some contract. She blinked hard, frustration tightening her jaw. You don't love her. Jason's expression didn't flinch, maybe not yet, but I will tell you what I do love: respect, loyalty, integrity. Things you trampled on when you ran. The air shifted. Vanessa wasn't expecting that answer, not the calm, not the clarity, not the conviction. She stepped closer. You re-choosing her? She demanded. I'm choosing myself, he said. She just happens to be the one who didn't walk away when things got hard. Vanessa's face faltered, hurt slipping through before rage replaced it. You'll regret this, she whispered harshly. When people start talking, when the whispers get louder, when investors start questioning your decisions, don't say I didn't warn you. I'll take that risk, he replied. Vanessa grabbed her purse and stormed out, heels hitting the floor like a countdown. Jason didn't chase her. He didn't call her back. And he felt no confusion. He felt relief. Back at home, Sarah was unraveling. She spent the entire morning replaying Vanessa's words, letting each one sink deeper than the last. Not his equal. Not good enough. Look at you. You don't belong here. It didn't matter how calmly Jason had defended her, his reassurance couldn't erase a lifetime of being overlooked or discarded. By midday, she wandered through the house without purpose, organizing things that didn't need organizing. She refolded towels in the bathroom, rearranged books on Jason's shelf, watered plants that were already damp. She felt like an intruder in her own life, like a placeholder occupying space she hadn't earned. When Jason came home earlier than usual, she startled as though caught doing something wrong. You're back, she said quickly, stepping away from the bookshelf. Yeah, he said, noticing her flustered movements. Everything okay? I'm fine, she said too fast. Jason stepped closer. What happened? Sarah shook her head. Nothing. He studied her for a moment, then gently reached for her hand, careful not to crowd her. Sarah talked to me. Her voice broke. She was right. No, she wasn't. You didn't hear everything she said, Sarah murmured. She's everything people expect you to be with. And she hesitated, struggling to find the word, not. Jason exhaled, a steadying breath. You not her. That's exactly why I want you here. But why? Sarah's voice climbed with raw frustration. You barely know me. You're right, he said. I don't know everything about you. He paused. But I know you're honest. I know you're strong. I know you stayed by my side in the moment I needed someone most. I know you're not afraid of getting your hands dirty. I know you're kind. Her eyes glistened. Kind isn't enough. Maybe not for her, he said. But it's enough for me. Sarah looked down. I don't want to ruin your life. You're not ruining anything. She stepped back, voice trembling. I don't fit here, Jason. He took a step toward her. Then we'll make a place that fits both of us. That stunned her. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't a dramatic speech. It was something quieter and far more genuine, a commitment to effort, to patience, to building something from scratch. Sarah's breath shook. You don't have to do this. I know, he said, but I want to. Her knees nearly buckled. She looked away quickly, afraid he would see how deeply his words struck her. She wasn't ready for the feelings growing inside her. She didn't want to fall for him, not when her footing in this new life felt so uncertain. But every day he chipped away at the walls she'd spent years building, not with pressure, but with consistency. With kindness. With intent. Jason took her hand again, gently guiding her toward the kitchen. Come on, he said softly, sit with me. We'll go through this together. She followed, not because she felt strong, but because he made her feel like she didn't have to be. They sat at the island, And Jason recounted his meeting with Vanessa, the contract, the manipulation, the offer to annul their marriage. Sarah stared at him. You turned down $3 million. He shrugged lightly. Money isn't worth my dignity. But that's Jason, that's life-changing money. So are you, he said without hesitation. Her breath caught, and for the first time since the wedding, Sarah didn't feel like a burden, a mistake, or a placeholder. She felt chosen. Not accidentally. Not temporarily. But consciously. And that terrified her even more. Not because she doubted him, because she was starting to realize she didn't want to lose him. Sarah was clipping loose branches near the garden when the unfamiliar car rolled up the driveway. It wasn't the kind of vehicle Jason's clients drove. It was older, sun-faded, with a dent near the passenger door and a bumper sticker peeling at the edges. She paused, pruning shears frozen mid-air. As two people stepped out, a middle-aged woman with cautious eyes and a man about the same age who carried himself like he'd practiced for this moment. Sarah's breath tightened. She knew them instantly, even before they said anything. Robert's mother and twin brother. She'd spent years hoping never to see them again, not out of anger, but out of the weight of memories she thought she'd never be strong enough to face. They represented a chapter of her life she'd buried beneath layers of struggle, grief, and survival. Sarah, the woman asked, voice trembling. Sarah's grip on the shears slackened. Mrs. Brooks. The woman nodded, eyes already glossed with emotion. The man beside her, Ethan, Robert's twin, shifted his weight, hands shoved deep in his pockets. We didn't know how else to reach you, Ethan said. You disappeared. We looked, but I moved around a lot, Sarah whispered. I wasn't easy to find. The three stood awkwardly near the garden, the air thick with the past they'd never resolved. Sarah heard the distant hum of Jason's car turning into the street. Panic rushed through her chest. She wasn't ready for him to see this. She wasn't ready to explain. Mrs. Brooks stepped forward. Sarah, we're not here to cause trouble. We're here because we owe you something. Sarah blinked, stunned. Oh me. The woman nodded, tears collecting at the corners of her eyes. We treated you unfairly after Robert died. We blamed you for things that weren't your fault. We let grief turn cruel. We abandoned you when you needed us. She swallowed hard. I'm sorry. Sarah felt her throat close. She'd imagined apologies before late at night, when loneliness swallowed her, but she never believed she'd hear one. Robert loved you, Mrs. Brooks said. We were too lost to see how much you lost too. Ethan stepped forward then, pulling out a small box, old, wooden, with faded engraving across the lid. He held it with both hands, almost reverently. These are his letters, Ethan said. Ones he wrote when he knew things were getting worse. He never sent them, and after he passed, Mom didn't want you to have them. We were selfish. He extended the box toward her. Sarah stared at it as though it might burn her. Why now? Because we realized holding on to them only kept you stuck in the shadows of a life you deserved to move forward from, Ethan said. And because we found out you remarried now. The words stung and soothed her at the same time. That life doesn't erase your past, Mrs. Brooks said, and we don't want our mistakes to follow you into it. As Sarah slowly reached for the box, Jason's car turned into the driveway. He parked, stepped out, and froze at the sight before him, Sarah trembling, two strangers standing close, their faces lined with old hurt. He hurried toward them. Sarah, what's going on? Sarah swallowed, her voice barely a breath. Jason, this is Robert's family. Jason's expression softened instantly. He nodded respectfully toward them. Mrs. Brooks stepped forward. You must be Jason. We've heard unexpected things. I imagine you have, he said gently. We didn't come to judge, she added. We came to make peace. Jason glanced at the box in Sarah's hands. Her fingers were trembling. Can we speak inside? He asked carefully. They all moved toward the house, entering the warm living room where sunlight pooled across the hardwood floors. Sarah stood near the couch, the box clutched against her chest as though it were the last fragile piece of a life she once lived. Jason stayed close, not touching her, but near enough that she felt grounded. Mrs. Brooks sat slowly. We weren't kind to Sarah after Robert died. You were grieving, Sarah murmured. That doesn't excuse how we treated you, Ethan said. We pushed you away. We let you carry guilt that never belonged to you. Jason watched Sarah's face closely. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. But her eyes held a depth of exhaustion that came from years of carrying weight no one had helped her hold. We heard you'd fallen on hard times, Mrs. Brooks said, voice cracking. And we weren't there. We should have been. You couldn't have changed anything, Sarah whispered. I could have changed how alone you felt, Mrs. Brooks replied. Jason felt something tighten in his chest at those words. He had only known Sarah a short time, but he'd learned enough to see how loneliness etched itself into her habits, her hesitation when taking food, her careful footsteps around the house, her instinct to make herself small. He wondered how much of that had begun here, with this family she once trusted. We brought the letters, Ethan said again, nodding toward the box. They were yours. Sarah finally lowered her gaze to the box. Her fingers brushed the weathered wood. She remembered Robert's handwriting, the way he pressed too hard on the pen, the slight slant of his letters. She imagined the words inside, words he'd meant to give her, words she'd never read. Jason stepped closer. If you want, I can leave you to read them alone. She looked up, startled by the offer. No, stay. He nodded, settling beside her on the couch. Mrs. Brooks and Ethan rose to leave. We don't expect forgiveness, Mrs. Brooks said gently. But we hope this helps you find peace. Sarah nodded slowly. Thank you for coming. The door closed behind them. She and Jason sat quietly for a moment, emotion swirling between them too thick to name. Are you okay? He asked softly. Sarah opened the box. Inside were dozens of envelopes, gently bundled with worn string. Her breath caught. I don't know what's in them, she whispered. You don't have to read them now. She nodded, but she was already loosening the string. The first letter slipped free. She unfolded it, hands trembling. Robert's handwriting greeted her, familiar, nostalgic, painful. She read the first line. Her breath shook. He wrote that he was scared, she whispered. Scared of dying, scared of leaving me alone. Jason swallowed. Sarah. She kept reading, voice trembling but steady. He said he worried I'd blame myself. And he wanted me to know none of it was ever my fault. A tear finally slid down her cheek. Jason gently reached out, resting his hand over hers, not pulling, not pushing, just offering presence. He loved you, Jason said quietly. Sarah nodded, tears falling freely now. I loved him too. And that love doesn't disappear, he said. It becomes part of who you are. She looked at him, really looked at him, as though seeing layers of him she hadn't noticed before. You're not threatened by this? She asked softly. He shook his head. Your past doesn't scare me. Losing you would. Her breath caught at his honesty. In that moment, holding letters from a man she once loved, sitting beside a man she was slowly beginning to trust, Sarah felt something shift deep inside her. Not betrayal, not confusion. Permission. Permission to grieve. Permission to heal. Permission to move forward. And maybe, slowly, permission to feel something new. Jason didn't push her. He didn't try to define the moment or steer it toward anything romantic. He simply stayed beside her, solid, steady, present. And for the first time in years, Sarah didn't feel torn between the life she lost and the life she was building. She felt whole. Not complete. Not healed. But whole enough to take the next step. She looked at Jason, eyes soft through tears. Thank you. He gave her a small, warm smile. You don't need to thank me. I'm right where I want to be. And as she rested her head gently against his shoulder, a tentative gesture. But real Jason let himself hope for the first time that their unexpected marriage might become something more than survival. Something chosen. Something shared. Something real. In the days following the visit from Robert's family, something subtle but unmistakable shifted between Jason and Sarah. Whatever invisible wall had stood between them, made from caution, uncertainty, and unspoken fears, began to thin. It didn't fall all at once, Etha. It softened in quiet moments, in shared spaces, in the tentative steps two people take when learning to trust in something fragile but meaningful. Jason noticed it first in the mornings. Sarah no longer rushed outside at dawn to avoid crossing paths with him. Instead, she lingered in the kitchen, sometimes reaching for mugs at the same time he did. Their hands would brush, neither pulling away immediately anymore. She still blushed, but she didn't retreat. Jason pretended not to notice her shy reactions, but inside, each moment etched itself into him like a quiet promise. One evening, a cold front rolled through Austin, bringing a crispness that hinted at early winter. Sarah was curled on the living room couch, wrapped in a throw blanket, flipping through one of the books Jason had recommended. Jason was at the dining table, finishing work, though he'd reread the same paragraph of his email 3 times. His focus kept drifting to her, the way her brow furrowed when she concentrated, the way she tucked her legs beneath her, the way she mouthed certain sentences like she wanted to feel the weight of them fully. "You okay over there?" Jason asked, leaning back in his chair. Sarah looked up, startled. "I didn't know I was making a face." "You weren't," he said, smiling softly. "Just looked deep in thought." She closed the book gently. "It's heavier than I expected." "Too heavy?" "No," she said, "just honest." Jason nodded. Sometimes honesty feels heavier than lies. Sarah held his gaze longer than usual. Something unspoken passed between them, acknowledging everything they had lived through, the betrayals, the heartbreak, the loneliness, and the unexpected path that had brought them here. Jason shut his laptop and walked over. "Can I join you?" Sarah shifted, giving him space on the other end of the couch. He sat, stretching one arm along the back of it, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his presence. She adjusted the blanket slightly, offering him a small corner of it. He took it with a faint smile. For a moment neither spoke. Then Sarah exhaled slowly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why didn't you try to fix things with Vanessa? Even before the wedding you must have known something was wrong." Jason leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I did know, but I let myself ignore it." "Why?" "Because I thought that's what love looked like," he admitted. "Compromise, patience, forgiveness. I kept adjusting, hoping she'd meet me halfway. But she didn't." Sarah nodded slowly, absorbing his words. Jason continued. "I grew up watching my parents work through things. My dad walked out when I was young, but when my mom remarried, she and my stepdad always fought for each other. I thought I needed to do that too, even when I was the only one fighting." Sarah softened. "You deserved someone who met you there." Jason met her eyes and something warm flickered between them. "Maybe I found her." Sarah's breath caught. She looked down at her hands, unsure how to respond. It wasn't a declaration, it wasn't even romantic. But it was intentional. And it shook her in ways she wasn't ready to admit. "You can ask me something too," she said quietly. Jason smiled. "Okay, what were you thinking when you said yes that day at the church?" Her cheeks warmed. "Honestly, I wasn't thinking at all." Jason chuckled. "Fair." She turned toward him, expression more serious now. "But then I saw how hurt you were. And I knew what it felt like to be abandoned in a moment when you needed someone the most. I didn't want you to stand there alone." Jason felt those words hit deeper than he expected. "You saved me that day." Sarah shook her head. "I just stood with you. You saved yourself." Jason studied her for a moment, really studied her. The gentle strength in her voice, the sincerity in her eyes, the courage it took for her to even be sitting here in a house she never imagined living in. "You know," he said softly, "you were allowed to want more than survival." Sarah's chest tightened. "I don't know how to do that." "Then we'll learn together." Her breath trembled. She wasn't used to someone offering a future that didn't demand perfection or sacrifice. She wasn't used to someone wanting to grow with her instead of pulling her forward or leaving her behind. "Can I tell you something too?" she whispered. "Anything." "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared that you'll wake up one day and realize this doesn't make sense. That I don't make sense in your world." Jason didn't hesitate. "Sarah, you re the only part of my world that's made sense in months." Her eyes glistened. "And," he continued gently, "for what it's worth, I'm scared too." She blinked. "You?" He nodded. "I'm scared of failing you, of moving too fast, of not giving you the space to grow into this life. I'm scared of wanting too much." Sarah's breath stilled. "What do you want?" Jason paused thoughtfully, deliberately. "A real marriage, not right away, not forced, but something with honesty, effort, connection." He looked into her eyes. "Something that's ours." Her heart fluttered with a mix of hope and fear. "And what if I'm not ready?" "Then I'll wait," Jason said. "There's no deadline." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest, so unfamiliar yet so welcome she almost didn't recognize it. She shifted closer, just an inch, but enough that their knees touched lightly beneath the blanket. Jason didn't move away. She stared at the small point of contact, marveling at how something so simple could feel so significant. "Can I ask one more thing?" she whispered. "Always. Do you regret marrying me?" Jason didn't answer immediately, not because he hesitated, but because he wanted to choose words that would reach her fully. "No," he said, "not for a second. You've changed this home. You've changed me, and I'm grateful for you." Her eyes shimmered. She opened her mouth to respond, but emotion stole the words. So she did the only thing she could manage. She leaned her head gently against his shoulder. Jason froze, not out of discomfort, but out of awe. Slowly he lifted his arm and let it rest lightly around her shoulders. The contact was soft, respectful, patient. She relaxed into him, the tension she always carried melting for the first time in what felt like years. Minutes passed in the soft glow of the living room, neither speaking, both breathing slowly like two people discovering the safety of being understood. The space between them had changed. That night didn't end in confessions, or passion, or promises. It ended in a simple truth. They weren't strangers anymore. They weren't pretending. They weren't temporary. They were becoming something real. And neither of them was afraid of it anymore. In the weeks that followed their vulnerable night on the couch, the atmosphere in Jason's home changed in ways neither of them had expected. It wasn't dramatic or rapid, it was slow, like a soft tide washing against the shore, reshaping things one wave at a time. The cautious distance they once kept shrank little by little, replaced by familiarity, by ease, by something that felt startlingly natural. Sarah began leaving her shoes by the front door instead of neatly hiding them in the guest room closet. Jason noticed and smiled every time he walked by. She started cooking small things, simple soups, scrambled eggs, grilled vegetables, nothing elaborate, but enough to show comfort growing. And Jason started coming home earlier, closing his laptop faster, lingering longer at the dinner table just to hear about her day. They weren't acting like a married couple. They were becoming one. One crisp Saturday morning, Jason found Sarah in the living room, rearranging the throw pillows. She'd grown bolder with the space, experimenting with small changes, placing a plant near a window, reorganizing books, even adding a candle on the coffee table. "Looks good," Jason said, leaning in the doorway. Sarah jumped slightly. "I didn't mean to change too much." "I like it," he assured her. "Feels like both of us now." Her cheeks warmed. "I'm trying not to take over your home." "It's our home," he corrected gently. "I want you to shape it too." The words struck deeper than he intended. Sarah stared at him, her eyes softening, the weight of belonging settling on her shoulders in a way that didn't scare her anymore. Later that afternoon, Jason offered to teach her to drive his truck. She hesitated. She hadn't driven in years, not since money became so tight that she stopped renewing her license. "I'll mess up," she said nervously, gripping the seatbelt in the passenger seat. "That's the point," he said with a grin. "You can't learn if you don't mess up." He walked her through each step, adjusting the seat, explaining the gears, guiding her hands on the wheel with gentle touches that made her heart stutter every time his skin brushed hers. She stalled the engine twice. She nearly backed into a bush. She mashed the gas too hard once and startled them both. But Jason laughed openly, warmly, not mocking, just enjoying the moment. "You redoing great," he said. "No, I'm not," she argued. "Okay, you redoing entertainingly bad," he teased, "but that's part of the charm." She laughed, a real laugh, bright and unguarded. It was the first time he'd heard that sound from her, and it rooted itself inside him instantly. He didn't realize how deeply he needed to hear it. On their way home, she stole a quick glance at him. "Thank you for being patient." "Thank you for trying," he replied. "That's all I ever ask." Their connection deepened because of these small things, not passion or grand gestures, but effort, trust, consistency. Yet, life wasn't done testing them. One afternoon, Mrs. Miller stopped by unexpectedly. She'd softened toward Sarah, but not entirely. Protective instincts still flared beneath her composed exterior. She found Jason and Sarah preparing lunch together, Jason chopping vegetables, while Sarah washed fruit at the sink. The scene looked domestic, intimate, almost tender. Mrs. Miller blinked. "I see you two are settling in." Sarah stiffened instantly, stepping aside as if caught breaking a rule. Jason noticed and gently touched her elbow. "Mom," he said, "we redoing more than settling. We rebuilding a life." Mrs. Miller's eyes traveled to Sarah's nervous hands. "Are you happy, dear?" Sarah hesitated. "I'm trying." Mrs. Miller softened then, surprisingly. "Trying is more than most people do." Jason smiled a little. "Exactly." But as the conversation unfolded, Sarah caught small glances from Mrs. Miller, evaluating, curious, maybe even skeptical. It made Sarah withdraw slightly, her confidence shrinking the way it used to whenever she felt out of place. She excused herself, stepping into the hallway. Jason followed her a moment later. "You okay?" he asked. Sarah nodded, though her shoulders were tense. I don't want to be judged all the time. Jason moved closer. You're not being judged by me. Her eyes lifted to his. I know. But it's still hard. Jason took her hand gently. Then we'll make it easier. Together. His reassurance wasn't dramatic, but it steadied her. Still, she needed time to process. And he gave her that. Later that week, another test arrived in the form of Jason's business dinner. The Reed family would be attending the same circle Vanessa belonged to. Jason didn't want to go, but contracts depended on his presence. Sarah offered to stay home, but Jason refused. You're my wife, he said. You come with me. Sarah's stomach twisted. They'll talk. Then let them, Jason said. We walk in together. That night, when she stepped out of the bedroom in a simple navy dress Jason's mother had helped her choose, he stopped breathing for a moment. She wasn't glamorous like the women in his social circle, but she was stunning in a way that felt real, grounded, deeply human. Her uncertainty only made her more endearing. You look amazing, he said. She looked away, embarrassed. Don't lie. I'm not, he said, voice low. You're beautiful. The dinner was uncomfortable. People stared. Some whispered. A few offered condescending smiles. Vanessa didn't approach them, but she stared across the room with a gaze sharp enough to cut through steel. Sarah stood closer to Jason with each passing minute, and he stood taller every time someone looked at her with doubt. At one point, a business associate muttered, unexpected choice. Jason, glancing at Sarah. Jason's reply was firm. She's my best decision. The man raised his hands defensively. Didn't mean anything by it. But Jason meant everything in his response. When they returned home, Sarah exhaled heavily. I don't know how you deal with all of that. Jason touched her cheek gently. You handled it better than you think. I felt like I was shrinking. But you didn't disappear, he said softly. You stood right beside me. Sarah looked up at him, then really looked, and her walls began to crumble. She wasn't just grateful, she was drawn to him. His steadiness, his loyalty, his warmth. The way he defended her without hesitation. The way he saw her. She took a small step forward. Jason didn't move, but something shifted in his eyes, an invitation, not a demand. Her voice trembled. Jason, what are we becoming? He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Something good. She swallowed. Something real. Yes, he said, something real. She didn't kiss him, not yet. But she leaned into his chest, letting his arms wrap around her in the most natural embrace they'd ever shared. His chin rested against her hair. Their breaths sensed, their hearts steadied, and in that moment, everything felt right. Not rushed, not forced, not bound by circumstance. Just two people choosing each other more with every day. 5 years had passed since the day Jason stood alone at the altar, believing his life had fallen apart. He never imagined then that the moment would become the beginning of everything he would one day cherish. Now, as he stood in the backyard of the home he and Sarah had built together, one filled with warmth, laughter, and memories, he felt an overwhelming gratitude for every twist that had led them here. The sun was setting behind the cedar trees, casting a golden glow across the yard. Jason leaned against the porch railing, watching Sarah chase their 4-year-old daughter, Lily, across the grass. The little girl shrieked delightfully as Sarah swooped her up, spinning her in the air. Lily's pigtails bounced wildly, and her laughter poured into the air, bright and uninhibited. Jason smiled at the sight, his heart swelling the way it always did when he saw them together. Sarah caught sight of him watching and grinned. A little help here, she called. Jason pushed off the railing and jogged toward them. Lily ran straight into his arms, wrapping her tiny hands around his neck. Daddy, Mommy's too fast. She gets her speed from you, Sarah teased. Definitely you, Jason countered. Sarah laughed and brushed a strand of hair from her face, hair now a little longer, a little lighter, and filled with a softness that matched the life she'd created here. 5 years had reshaped her. She still carried traces of the woman who once stood in a shelter line, unsure of tomorrow, but now she moved with confidence, with belonging, with love she no longer questioned. Jason set Lily down, and she sprinted toward her playhouse, leaving her parents alone in the middle of the yard. Sarah stepped closer, slipping her hand into Jason's. He squeezed gently. Dinner's almost ready, she said. Your mom's coming over. She said she made pie. Jason chuckled. She made it because she knows you like it. Or because she thinks I don't get enough sugar. Sarah joked softly. Jason shifted to face her fully. She adores you now. You know that, right? Sarah smiled, a little shy even after all these years. Took her long enough. She's stubborn, he said, and you had a whole life to overcome in her mind. But you did. Not alone, Sarah murmured. Jason brushed his thumb across the back of her hand. No, never alone. They stood like that for a moment, the easy closeness of two people who had learned each other intimately, strengths, weaknesses, fears, joys. Their love had not arrived like a storm. It had grown the way vines climb a wall, slowly, deliberately, until one day they looked around and realized it covered everything.
"Daddy!"
Lily yelled from the playhouse door. "Come see my tea party." Jason groaned jokingly. "I think she wants to stuff plastic cookies into my face again." Sarah smirked. "She does. And you going?" "Yes, ma'am." Jason saluted playfully before walking toward Lily. Sarah watched him go, her heart warm. She still remembered the nervous woman she had been when she first moved into his house, the way she tiptoed around the furniture. Afraid to break anything, afraid to be anyone more than temporary. She remembered the shaky conversations, the tentative touches, the moments when she wondered if she deserved a good life at all. But Jason had taught her patiently, consistently, that love wasn't something she had to earn by being perfect. It was something built, nurtured, and chosen every day. Later that evening, after dinner, and after Lily fell asleep curled between her favorite stuffed animals, Jason and Sarah stepped onto the patio with 2 cups of tea. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of jasmine Sarah had planted years earlier. Jason leaned back on the outdoor sofa. "Do you ever think about that day?" "Which one?" Sarah asked, though she knew. He looked at her, eyes softening. "The day you married me." Sarah took a slow breath. "All the time. Feels like another lifetime." "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. Her eyebrows rose. "Jason, if I regretted it, would I be standing here with you? Would we have Lily? Would we have built everything we have?" "I know," he said. "I didn't mean regret like that. I meant, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd said no?" Sarah looked out at the yard, watching tiny solar lights blink along the path. "I think about it sometimes. But not out of doubt, out of gratitude." Jason smiled. "Gratitude?" She nodded. "Because I didn't have a future before that day. Not one I believed in. I was drifting. Surviving. Trying to outrun a past that kept clawing at me. And you," she exhaled softly. "You gave me somewhere to land. Somewhere to grow." Jason shifted closer. "You gave me the same thing." Sarah rested her head against his shoulder. "Funny, isn't it? We met on one of the worst days of your life. And one of the hardest," Jason added. "But it became the best day of my life too." She smiled gently. "Mine too." Jason wrapped his arm around her, and she curled into him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Their life together wasn't perfect. They still argued sometimes, still faced challenges, still struggled with moments of fear or doubt. But they always found their way back to each other. That was the difference. They had commitment, honesty, and healing woven into the foundation of their marriage. "Do you think Lily will ever believe we got married the day we met?" Sarah asked with a laugh. Jason snorted. "No chance. She's gonna think we were messing with her." "We kind of are," Sarah said. Jason glanced down at her, brushing a soft kiss against her forehead. "One day, when she's old enough to understand, we will tell her the full story. How love sometimes arrives in the most unexpected ways." Sarah reached for his hand again. "And how sometimes the broken places in 2 people fit together perfectly." Jason lifted her chin, meeting her eyes. "Exactly." The porch light cast a warm glow on their faces as they watched the stars emerge overhead. The world around them had changed in countless ways since the day they said impulsive vows in a church filled with shock and whispers. But the most important change had happened within them. 2 lives, once heavy with hurt, had found a home in each other. Sarah turned her face toward Jason's chest, whispering, "Thank you for choosing me." Jason rested his chin on her hair. "I'll choose you every day." And he meant it fully, deeply, absolutely. The night stretched on, calm and steady, wrapping around the home that had transformed from a place of escape into a place of love. Not perfect, not flawless, but real. Real in the way that mattered most. Real in the way that lasted. Real in the way that began with 2 broken souls who took a chance on each other and built something extraordinary, one honest moment at a time. The story of Jason and Sarah teaches one of the most profound truths about human nature. Sometimes the moments that seem to tear our lives apart are the ones that open the door to something far better than we ever imagined. Jason believed his life had ended when he was left standing at the altar, humiliated and exposed in front of everyone who thought they knew him. Yet the heartbreak that shattered his world also stripped away everything superficial, everything built on expectation rather than genuine connection. In that raw moment, when all the layers of success, confidence, and social standing were peeled back, Jason found clarity. He discovered that strength is not measured by how perfectly we plan our lives, but by how we rise when everything collapses. His chaos didn't destroy him, it transformed him, revealing that resilience begins the moment we refused to let someone else's actions define our worth. Sarah's journey brings another powerful message. No matter how lost life makes us feel, we are never too broken to be loved, valued, or chosen. She spent years believing she didn't deserve much, convinced by hardship and loss that she was meant to survive in the background of the world, rather than live in the center of it. Yet despite her fears, she had something far more precious than polished appearances: genuine compassion. It was her kindness, not her circumstances, that changed the trajectory of her life. She stood by Jason not because she expected anything in return, but because she recognized pain and offered humanity. That moment became the turning point not only for him, but for her. The story reminds us that the greatest impact we can make often comes from the simplest act of standing someone during their darkest hour. In a world that often measures value by wealth, beauty, or status, Sarah teaches us that empathy is more powerful than any privilege. Their relationship shows that real love isn't something you find, it's something you build. Jason and Sarah didn't fall into love effortlessly. Their connection grew slowly, piece by piece, shaped by patience, honesty, and a willingness to be vulnerable. They had to unlearn fears, challenge insecurities, and face judgment from the outside world. Yet every challenge strengthened them, not because they were perfect, but because they chose to face their imperfections together. They learned that love thrives not on flawless moments, but on understanding, forgiveness, effort, and courage. It is built in the everyday moments: sharing breakfast, standing up for one another, creating routines, supporting each other's grief, and celebrating small victories. Their story reminds us that lasting relationships are not forged in passion alone, but in mutual respect, trust, and the quiet decision to show up every single day. Another key lesson is that the past does not determine the future unless we allow it to. Sarah carried years of guilt, loss, and abandonment, believing her history made her unworthy of happiness. Jason carried fear of being betrayed again, wounded pride, and the pressure of others' expectations. Both had reasons to shut down, to give up, to stay guarded. Yet they learned that healing happens when we stop running from our past and begin facing it with honesty, with support, and with someone willing to walk beside us. When Robert's family returned, Sarah confronted the pain she had buried for years, and instead of breaking her, it freed her. When Vanessa tried to drag Jason back into a life built on appearances, he chose integrity over image. Their courage to confront what once hurt them allowed them to build something new, something untainted by fear or shame. The story also highlights the danger of judging others by appearances. Nearly everyone who saw Jason and Sarah together in the early days assumed their marriage was a mistake, an impulsive decision, a mismatch, a moment of desperation. But what people failed to see was the depth behind their actions. Society often overlooks quiet strength, compassion, and authenticity, valuing surface-level perfection instead. Jason and Sarah learned that the opinions of outsiders hold no power unless we give them power. As long as they stood united, they were untouchable. And over time, even those who doubted them came to respect the genuine bond they had built. Finally, the greatest lesson is that love often arrives disguised as disruption. Jason found love in the most unexpected place: a stranger who stepped forward when everyone else stepped away. Sarah found love not when she was ready, but when she was terrified and unsure of her worth. Their story reminds us that life rarely unfolds the way we plan. Sometimes it breaks us open so something new can grow. Sometimes the wrong people leave so the right people can enter. Sometimes the worst day of our lives becomes the doorway to the best chapters of our future. Their journey shows that fate isn't always magical or dramatic. It's often just two wounded hearts recognizing something familiar in each other. Love doesn't always come wrapped in comforters. Sometimes it comes disguised as chaos, heartbreak, or chance. But when nurtured with patience and understanding, it can become something extraordinary, something healing, stabilizing, and life-changing. Jason and Sarah's story is a reminder that we are all deserving of love that chooses us, love that stays, and love that grows with us. It teaches us that our scars don't make us unworthy, they make us human. And in the hands of the right person, those scars become the very places where love grows strongest. If you find this video helpful, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss upcoming videos. If you have any suggestions or questions, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd really love to hear your feedback. Thank you for watching until the end.